Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that might be what this is all about. What information Facebook's collecting, who they're sending it to, and whether they ever asked me in advance my permission to do that.
Your business practices allowed for the abuse of private data in order to manipulate for political purposes.
There is no way that Brexit or Trump or the Italian elections could ever possibly have happened. It was social media.
Is Cambridge Analytica an isolated case, or would you say it's the top of the iceberg?
Can you tell us how you define acceptable comment and whether or not Facebook actually is capable of regulating this for itself?
Who decides what is acceptable?
Is the only way of preventing Facebook collecting my data to avoid the internet altogether?
You have to ask yourself how you will be remembered. As one of the three big internet giants, together with Steve Jobs, I should say, and Bill Gates, who have enriched our world and our societies? Or on the other hand, in fact, a genius who created a digital monster that is destroying our democracies and our societies for the moment.
So I was actually studying for half a year in California in the Silicon Valley and as an Austrian lawyer, and it was interesting because we had privacy class, so we talked about privacy law, but they only talked about European privacy law because there is no privacy law in the US for most situations. We had one guy from Facebook coming over explaining how they deal with it. And the message was rather simple, that they said, you know, we just don't care for European privacy laws because there is no enforcement and no consequences anyways. Usually in law, you know, if you park in the wrong spot, you get a parking ticket. If you speed, you get a speeding ticket. But in this privacy world, where we're now moving into an information society, where information becomes a huge asset, the rules around this information are not at all really enforced. A lot of these tech companies continue to do that until today. Still today they say, oh, the law says we're not allowed to do it, but we read it another way. I think that's important to understand, is the culture of the Silicon Valley is fuck it, break the law, just do it and then see if it works or not. If your company fails, you're gonna be bankrupt by the time any lawsuit comes around anyway, so you will not have to deal with it. Or you're gonna be so big and important that you'll just pay it off and, you know, just pay a fine and go ahead. So under European law, you can get a full copy of all of your data. That's basically this right to access. So you can go to any company in the world and say, I want everything you have about me. So I did that with Facebook at the time, and it was a lengthy email chain with them. But after a while, we got CDs with a PDF file on it. And in my case, it was 1,200 pages. So it was kind of interesting because it was really a paper stack that high if you would have printed it off. And I only used Facebook for 3 years at the time, and I posted something like once a week. Like, I was not a heavy user. And what's especially interesting is that a lot of the data is not stuff you put in yourself. So people still have that idea of, I share stuff with Facebook and that's all they have. Now the reality is that Facebook has a lot of data that they get from friends of yours. So for example, if a friend of you installs the Facebook app on the phone, they may get your phone number, address, etc. through that app. Without you ever giving your phone number to Facebook, they still have your phone number. And they do similar things with email addresses and the like. A good example was there is a data category called last location. So they try from all the data they have about you, they try to figure out where have you been the last time. So there was exact geo coordinates where they think I've been the last time without me even having a GPS phone at the time. Like, I didn't have a GPS system in my phone. I've never checked into a place. I've never said I'm here, blah, blah, blah. But for example, from the IP address, they can figure out you were at that university campus because your phone was logged in the Wi-Fi there. And then they were like, okay, he was in this place because we know where that Wi-Fi is. Tinder is a good example. Every time you open Tinder, that forwards that information to Facebook. So they know every time you open Tinder. Like, most people that install Tinder will probably not know that their data goes to Facebook. So there's a lot of things that people do not proactively share, but that companies can generate in the background about you. Since then, Facebook does much more.
over so-called shadow profiles, where Facebook collects and stores data about internet users that don't have or use Facebook. How can non-users stop Facebook collecting their data? And what do you do with the non-Facebook data? Do you commercialize it? And given you do that, is it morally acceptable, do you think, in your opinion, to collect non-Facebook users' data without them knowing what you do with it?
I want to be sensitive to time because we are 15 minutes over the scheduled meeting. Is there anything else here?
Shadow profiles. Shadow profiles.
On a security side, we think it's important to keep it to protect people in our community. Were there any other themes that we want to get through? I mean,
Now, Facebook was stupid enough to send us all the illegal data, basically. I was at the time asking someone from Facebook, why were you so stupid to send all of this? And they were like, yeah, we had internal communication problems. So someone in the legal department just put it all on a CD, sent it off, and thought that that's it. And that also shows how they were not aware of how illegal it is what they do. Like, they're simply very ignorant in what they do. Because they think it's all fine anyways. And that also shows a bit how they don't even see the problem, you know?
I think it's pretty much impossible, I believe, to start a company in your dorm room and then grow it to be at the scale that we're at now without making some mistakes. And because our service is about helping people connect and information, those mistakes have been different in how we try not to make the same mistake multiple times, but in general, a lot of the mistakes are around how people connect to each other just because of the nature of the service. We need to now take a more active view in policing the ecosystem and in watching and kind of looking out and making sure that all of the members in our community are using these tools in a way that's going to be good and healthy.
So I filed complaints with the Irish regulator. It was forwarded to Facebook, and I got an email from some Facebook executive within 2 weeks or something. So we had a meeting for 7 hours, but the answers were very similar than before. It was basically this story that they think it's all legal because they have a different view of what the law says. So a very typical example is if Facebook has data about you that someone else shared, that not you have actually put up. They say that there is third-party consent. So it's not you that consented that Facebook has the data, but your friends consented. And something like a third-party consent does not exist in law. Like, that way I could sign a contract for you and you then have to pay it. Like, this is insane. But that was the legal arguments that came back. So with a lot of that, as a lawyer, you were sitting there, it's like, you're not telling me seriously that there's third-party consent, because if that's true, then just Mark Zuckerberg can just sign away the rights for everybody in the world and we're done. And that showed how they haven't even thought about these basic questions. Where is my consent? Where did you get this data from? The answer is, we don't know. We don't know where we got it. We don't know where we got consent. I don't think that anybody of the Facebook engineers knows how Facebook works as a whole, because they only work on one part of it. So no average user will ever understand it. We had a court hearing 2 or 3 weeks ago in Vienna, where, again, the Facebook witness said, everybody understands all of this. They all have consented. Every little 70-year-old person that uses Facebook agreed to all of this. And if you then ask them, how do you do that? What do you actually do with the data? She, as the main privacy person of Facebook in Europe, said, I don't know. Now, the interesting thing is, if even the main privacy person of Facebook cannot explain to you what they do with the data, how should you have ever consented to it? Privacy is so hard to grasp. Like, people have a feeling of, okay, someone is following me, or there's weird stuff online and there's suddenly advertisement that is connected to something that I've done 3 days ago in a totally different context. That's stuff where people feel that something is going on. But technically it's so complicated that I think most people don't really get a good understanding. Every time you click on a page, there's a new cookie placed on your browser in the background. Each one of these cookies is not a big thing. And each time you visit a page is not a big piece of information. But for example, Facebook can gather all your visits of different pages once they're included in the page. So they can tell you which page you have visited and which newspaper article you have read 3 years ago. People don't see the problem in each individual information, but once they see how much it is after all, then they suddenly feel like, whoa, that's a bit too much, really. Also a thing with a lot of these platforms that what you see is the pretty face. You see the nice side of Facebook where all your friends are and it's all interesting and so on. People do not see what happens on the servers in the background. They don't not see the algorithm in the background. They don't see all the data that's gathered in the background, because if they would see it, they would probably not use it anymore. And I think there are many of these elements that come together why privacy is very, very hard for us to understand and not very tangible. Like, they have all this information about you, which may not be misused in the moment, but just the potential of all that data can already change your behavior, can already feel a bit worrisome. Privacy are not necessarily against the technology. It's more about a question of how we shape the technology to serve the public interest the best, and not to only serve a couple of companies that make a shitload of money on the stock exchange right now.